Racist cop pushes black veteran aside, freezes when the general salutes him first. Honor has no skin color, only bloodshed for the fatherland. The July sun pressed down hard on the cracked sidewalks of downtown Atlanta. The city shimmered in a haze of heat, sirens echoed faintly in the distance, and the streets were crowded with locals gathering for the annual Memorial Day military tribute. Flags waved. Children in red, white, and blue gripped their parents' hands tightly. Military brass echoed from speakers mounted on lampposts. Among the crowd walked Malcolm R. Hayes. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, his right leg dragging just slightly. His hair was mostly gray, and a deep scar cut through his left brow. Dressed in a plain button-up shirt and worn slacks, he carried no outward sign of his decades-long military service. No medals on his chest, no uniform. Only a folded cap tucked under his arm bore a subtle insignia, one that only trained eyes would recognize as belonging to a combat medic with multiple tours. Malcolm's eyes scanned the crowd. Somewhere near the front of the plaza, a section had been reserved for veterans. That's where he was heading. But as he gently moved toward the barricades separating the general crowd from the front rows, he was met by a firm, unyielding hand. "Hold it right there, sir." Malcolm looked up at the young white police officer in a crisp uniform. His name tag read Whitaker. "I'm just heading to the vet section," Malcolm said calmly. "That area's restricted," Officer Whitaker replied, already stepping between Malcolm and the barricade. "Identification? I left it in the car. But no ID, no entry." "Step back." The officer's voice had shifted. Firmer. Harder. Something in it wasn't just about protocol, it was personal. He looked at Malcolm not like a man, but like a problem. Before Malcolm could explain, Whitaker placed a hand on his shoulder and shoved him slightly to the side. Back to the crowd. "I don't care what you think you're here for." Malcolm staggered but didn't resist. He caught himself against the metal barrier. Around them, murmurs rose. A few people frowned. A teenage girl nearby lowered her phone, which had been recording. An elderly woman placed a gentle hand over her heart. No one intervened. They never do. Malcolm exhaled slowly. His eyes didn't flash with anger. Instead, there was a heavy stillness in them, like a soldier watching another battlefield open up. From a distance, the drums rolled. The honored guests were arriving. Military generals, dignitaries, active-duty soldiers filed into the plaza's front stage. A spotlight shifted, casting a glow over the area Officer Whitaker had just guarded so fiercely. Malcolm took a step back and stood quietly. He didn't plead. He didn't push back. His silence became louder than anything he could have said. And then, above the crowd, a commanding voice from a speaker announced the arrival of one of the most decorated military leaders in the country. "Please welcome General Paul Cartwright." The crowd erupted in applause. Officer Whitaker straightened his posture, adjusting his cap and scanning the area with forced professionalism. He didn't notice that General Cartwright had paused. The general, a tall white man with deep lines on his face and sharp blue eyes, had locked eyes on something in the crowd. No, on someone. Malcolm Hayes. And before anyone could react, before the applause had even died down, General Cartwright did something unexpected. He stepped off the stage, walked past the front line of uniformed soldiers, through the barrier Officer Whitaker had so vigilantly protected, and came to stand before the man who had been pushed aside just moments before. Cartwright stood at attention, then raised his hand, and saluted. The crowd went silent. Malcolm did not salute back right away. He simply looked at Cartwright, his expression unreadable. Officer Whitaker turned, confused, and when he saw the general standing before the man he had just shoved aside, something in his spine went cold. He had made a mistake, a very public, irreversible mistake. And in that moment, as cameras clicked and whispers turned into gasps, the battle lines of perception began to shift. Not with violence, not with shouting, but with a single gesture of respect that the entire city would soon be talking about. Brad Whitaker stood frozen. The sun beat down on the back of his neck, but he felt cold. General Paul Cartwright, the man his father had once called the last of the true warriors, was standing at attention before the same man he had pushed aside moments earlier. The crowd no longer clapped. They stared, some in disbelief, some in anger, others in admiration. Phones were raised again, recording every second. Brad swallowed hard. The air was suddenly too thick. Cartwright lowered his hand and turned to the stunned officer. "Do you know who this man is?" Brad opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "This man is Staff Sergeant Malcolm R. Hayes. He saved the lives of 13 of my men in Helmand Province. One of them was me." The words cut like a knife. Cartwright stepped closer to Brad. "And today you pushed him aside like he was trash." Brad looked at Malcolm. The older man's face was calm but unreadable. No triumph, no spite, just silence. It was a silence that said more than any lecture could. Brad turned away, ashamed. Later that evening, the video exploded online. Every angle captured, every word spoken. A side-by-side photo circulated. Brad shoving Malcolm, then Cartwright saluting him. Social media boiled over. Some demanded Brad's suspension. Others turned the incident into a symbol of systemic injustice. News vans began parking outside the precinct. But Brad felt the weight long before the cameras came. In the mirror that night, he could not recognize himself. Not the crisp uniform, not the sharp jawline, not the polished boots. He remembered what his grandfather had told him as a child. Never let the badge become heavier than your heart. He had let it happen. He had worn the authority without understanding the responsibility. Brad had grown up in a quiet southern town, raised by a father who flew a flag on the lawn and locked his car doors whenever a black man walked by. The unspoken lessons had shaped him more than he realized. He had never been overtly cruel, but he had always assumed. He had looked at Malcolm and seen only what he was taught to see. The next morning, Brad sat alone at the precinct, staring at the complaint forms stacked on his desk. His supervisor entered and placed a sealed envelope in front of him. A formal reprimand, pending review, public image damage control. But that wasn't what hurt. What hurt was the way Malcolm had looked at him. Not with hatred, not even with disappointment, but with a kind of quiet exhaustion that said, "I've seen this before. I've lived through this before. I expected this." Brad couldn't take it. He got up, left the precinct without a word, and drove. Not home, not to a bar. He drove to the Veterans Memorial Plaza, where Malcolm had been standing just the day before. He found Malcolm sitting alone on a bench beneath a fading mural of soldiers from different eras. Malcolm wore the same simple clothes, the same calm expression. A pigeon landed near his feet. Brad approached slowly. His badge weighed like iron on his chest. "Mr. Hayes." Malcolm looked up but said nothing. Brad sat on the far end of the bench. "I was wrong." Still silence. "I thought I was doing my job, but I wasn't. I was acting out of fear and ignorance. And I'm sorry." Malcolm studied him for a long time. Then he spoke. "You ever served?" "No, sir." Then you wouldn't understand what it means to bleed for a country that still sees you as a threat when you come home. Brad lowered his head. I want to understand. Then sit with it, Malcolm said. Sit with the guilt, the discomfort. That's where change begins. They sat in silence. The city moved around them. Cars passed. Kids played across the street. But on that bench, something invisible shifted. Not erased, not resolved, but shifted. Brad didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't deserve it yet, but he stayed seated. He listened, and for the first time in his life, he began to see. A year passed. Summer returned to Atlanta, carrying the same sweltering heat, the same flags waving from balconies and storefronts. But something felt different in the air. Not louder, not quieter, just heavier with meaning. The Memorial Day event came again. The plaza was cleaned and polished, flowers arranged in rows near the base of the bronze statue honoring fallen soldiers. The crowd this year was even larger than the last. Cameras had arrived early. News crews waited with patient anticipation. They knew what had happened here a year ago, and they were waiting to see what would happen now. This time, Malcolm Hayes was not on the outside of the barrier. He was seated in the front row, his name printed in bold on the event program. A framed photo of him in uniform stood beside the podium. Around his neck hung the Distinguished Service Cross, shining in the sun. He still limped, still dressed plainly. But today he carried something else, acknowledgement. The crowd hushed as the next speaker was introduced. Please welcome Officer Brad Whitaker of the Atlanta Police Department. There was a ripple through the crowd. Some clapped softly, others whispered. But Brad walked onto the stage in full uniform, head high, eyes steady. He paused at the microphone, looked out at the crowd, and then down at Malcolm seated in the front row. He cleared his throat. I came here a year ago as a man wearing a badge and a belief that I was protecting this community. I left realizing I had been blind to the very people I swore to serve. He paused. The wind lifted the edges of his speech notes, but he did not read from them. 1 year ago, I disrespected a soldier. I disrespected a man who had given more for this country than I ever had. And he did not yell. He did not curse. He simply stood there and made me see myself clearly for the first time. He looked down again at Malcolm. I came to say thank you, not just for your service, but for your grace, for your silence that spoke louder than my voice ever could. Then Brad did something unexpected. In front of everyone, he removed his cap, stepped down from the stage, and walked to where Malcolm sat. He stood at attention, and he saluted. Malcolm slowly rose to his feet. His limp made the motion deliberate, and this time he returned the salute. The plaza exploded into applause. In that moment, it was not about race or rank or who had been right or wrong. It was about recognition. It was about the quiet victory of a man who had long been invisible finally being seen. Later that day, the image of the two men, one black, one white, saluting each other became the top story on every platform. But more than a story, it became a symbol. A lesson in how healing starts not with grand speeches, but with simple acts of dignity. Brad and Malcolm were later seen sitting together at a local school, speaking to children about service, honor, and what it truly means to stand for something. The applause had faded, the cameras had gone, but their story kept moving through conversations, through classrooms, through hearts. And for those who still wonder if change is possible, if reconciliation is real, this story stands as a living answer. Because sometimes, a single moment can transform an entire history. Please hit like if you found this story meaningful, share it to spread the message, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other compelling, inspiring, and insightful stories from us. Thank you for listening. See you in the next video.